Hare Krishna. Let me ask a very simple question. Not an emotional question, not a political question, not even a women guru question at first. Just a reading comprehension question. Imagine this was on the SAT. You're given two passages from Śrīla Prabhupāda. Passage A is the Sunīti Purport, and passage B is the Hamsaduta letter. The exam asks, which passage most directly expresses the author's intended implementation plan for ISKCON? Which answer would you choose? Because that is really the question, isn't it? Not can I build an argument from this passage, not can I infer something from this historical example, but which statement is more direct as an instruction for ISKCON to implement? The Sunīti Purport or the Hamsaduta letter? So let's look carefully. The Sunīti Purport appears in Srimad Bhagavatam 4.12.32. The context is Dhruva Maharaj, and he's remembering his mother Sunīti, who first gave him spiritual direction. And Śrīla Prabhupāda explains that Narada Muni was Dhruva's Diksha Guru, while Sunīti had given him crucial spiritual guidance and instruction. He also says that Sunīti, being a woman, and specifically his mother, could not become Dhruva's Diksha Guru. Now we accept that. We do not reject the purport, but we have to ask, what kind of passage is it? Is it an institutional directive to ISKCON? Is Prabhupada saying, here is my policy for my movement after my departure? Is he outlining a future system of education, qualification, titles, and initiations? No. He's explaining a specific historical episode from Dhruva Maharaj's life. Now compare that with the Hamsaduta letter. There, Prabhupada is directly speaking about his own disciples, his own books, his own educational system, his own future generations, his own program, his vision. This is not a personal letter telling Hamsaduta how to navigate a private personal issue. It is a letter of institutional direction written to one of the ISKCON leaders. He says he wants all of his spiritual sons and daughters to inherit the title Bhaktivedanta. Then he says those possessing that title will be allowed to initiate disciples. Initiate. Then he says, that is my program. Now just pause and think for a second. If this were an SAT question, which passage is more clearly an implementation directive? Passage A purport explaining why Narada initiated Dhruva rather than Sunīti in an ancient historical narrative from several yugas ago? Or passage B, a letter where Prabhupada explicitly lays out a future educational and initiating program for his own spiritual sons and daughters? The answer is obvious. The Hamsaduta letter is more direct. Why? Because it is actually about ISKCON in modern times. It is about Prabhupada's disciples. It is about future generations. It is about qualification. It is about initiation. And it literally says, that is my program. So the question is not whether the Sunīti Purport matters. Of course it matters. The question is whether we should take a historical purport that never gives a universal ban and to use that to override a direct institutional vision that explicitly includes Prabhupada's daughters. That is the issue. And this is where the anti-VDG argument becomes very difficult to sustain, this anti-Vaishnavi Diksha Guru argument. Because if women serving as Diksha Gurus were completely and absolutely, scripturally, shastrically prohibited, then why would Śrīla Prabhupāda write the Hamsaduta letter that way at all? Why would he say sons and daughters? Why not simply say sons? Why would he speak of future generations and initiation in the same paragraph, where he includes his daughters? Why would he say, all of my disciples in connection with increasing the number of generations? And why would he call that my program? These are not small questions. They go directly to how we understand Prabhupada's competence, his precision, and special position as founder Acharya. Because if someone says, well, Prabhupada included daughters, but he didn't really mean they could be included in the initiating part, then we have to ask, where did he say that? Where is the limiting clause? Where is the sentence that says, my daughters may inherit the title, but only my sons may initiate? It's not there. That restriction has to be added. And if someone says, well, Prabhupada was just encouraging them, but did not mean it as a real institutional direction, again, we must ask, then why does he say, this is my program? This is not casual encouragement language. That is program language. That is vision language. That is planning language. That is founder Acharya language. And if someone says, well, maybe he did not realize the implications, that becomes even more dangerous. Are we really prepared to say that Śrīla Prabhupāda, the founder Acharya of ISKCON, accidentally wrote some institutional directive that included his daughters in a future initiating framework, even though Shastra supposedly forbids it? That's a very serious implication. It does not honor him. Now, this is not the only place where Prabhupada speaks this way. In a direct interview, Professor O'Connell asked whether a woman could be a guru in the disciplic succession, and Prabhupada answered yes, like in your movement. Jana Devi, he gave her an example, right? Jana Devi. And then he stated that when one understands the science of Krishna, he or she can become guru. Again, the question was direct. The answer was direct. So what do we do with that? Do we say Prabhupada did not understand the question? Do we say he was being careless? Do we say he was secretly opposed to what he openly affirmed? That does not work. In his 1973 Vyas Puja lecture, Prabhupada told his disciples, explicitly including men, women, boys and girls, to become spiritual master by sincerely following and speaking Krishna's instruction. Again, we can discuss application. We should discuss qualification. We should discuss standards. But we cannot pretend that Prabhupada never empowered his female disciples to take up the guru function. He did. He repeatedly did. And then in Chaitanya Charitamrita, Adi 731, when his contemporary critics objected to his engaging boys and girls equally in the preaching and outreach and so on, Prabhupada did not apologize. He said the girls were as good as their brothers, and he said that stereotype methods would never spread Krishna consciousness. This is extremely important because many anti-Vaishnavi Diksha Guru arguments sound very similar to the criticisms Prabhupada was already answering to his contemporaries. These same anti-VDG folks are saying, this is not traditional. This is too much equality. This is Western influence. This is not how it was done before. And Prabhupada already knew that. He knew the old system. In the Himavati letter, he explicitly states that in India, traditionally, women stayed at home. He said that was the way in the old days. But then he says he has introduced a new thing in the history of the Sankirtan movement, and he is proud of it. It's not that he's not aware. So let us ask honestly, what possible explanation can opponents give without diminishing Śrīla Prabhupāda's status? If they say Prabhupada's daughters were included only sentimentally, then they reduce his words to sentiment. If they say he did not mean initiation when he said initiate disciples, then they empty his words of their natural meaning. If they say he was only accommodating Western culture, then they risk accusing him of compromising Siddhanta. And if they say, well, he didn't understand how this would be used later, then they imply the founder Acharya was not careful in giving future directives. And if they say, well, the Sunīti Purport overrides all of this, then they must explain why a historical narrative with no universal policy statement should overrule a direct ISKCON implementation letter that says, this is my program. That is the challenge. I'm not saying this to be harsh. I'm saying this because we need to be honest with the evidence. The VDG position is that a qualified Vaishnavi should not be disqualified merely because she's a woman. That is the issue. So let's return to the SAT question. 2 passages. One describes Sunīti and Dhruva in a particular historical context. The other lays out Prabhupada's program for his spiritual sons and daughters, future generations, qualification, and initiation. Which one is a more direct implementation directive for ISKCON? If we're reading carefully, the answer is clear. The Hamsaduta letter, of course. And once we admit that, the Sunīti Purport must be read in harmony with Prabhupada's direct institutional vision, not used to cancel it. That is the heart of the matter. We do not honor Śrīla Prabhupāda by making his direct instructions disappear. We honor him by letting them stand. His sons and daughters, his future generations, his standards, his preaching mission, his program.